I used to use it. Off or off? On. Good evening and welcome to the May 6, 2026 Special Hybrid Planning Commission meeting. I am Chair Thompson. Tonight's Hybrid Planning Commission meeting is being brought to you by Zoom. Welcome to all and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, please have your microphones turned on for the roll call. Deputy Clerk, please call the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Thompson,
Here.
Vice Chair Gibson,
Here.
Commissioner Hughes, here, Commissioner Neese,
Here.
and Commissioner Perez.
Here.
Thank you.
The Planning Commission meets in person and utilizes the Zoom platform for remote participation. I will do my best to recognize commissioners in the order in which hands are raised. After being recognized, you may then ask your questions. Our first item of business is public appearances. This is an opportunity for anyone to speak to the commission about issues of concern, except items requiring a public hearing, any quasi-judicial matters, or campaign-related matters. Staff, is there anyone who has signed up for public appearances as of 4 p.m. today who wishes to address the commission?
Mr. Chair, nobody has signed up.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you.
We'll move on then. Special business. The first item of regular business is to review and consider approving the April 29, 2026 special meeting minutes. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There is a motion by Commissioner Hughes and a second by Vice Chair Gibson to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, staff, please conduct a roll call.
Commissioner Neese,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibson,
Aye.
Chair Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes, aye, and Commissioner Perez.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes. The second and final item of regular business is Agenda Bills PCB 26-04, briefing on comprehensive plan elements and station sub-area plan compliance. Welcome Adam Zach, Principal Planner.
Gonna turn my video on here. Good evening. Let's see, I've got a quick slide deck. Well, relatively quick slide deck. Let me share my screen. Okay, so tonight will be a briefing on the station sub-area plan and the comprehensive plan elements as amended or as proposed to be amended. We're going to start with the station sub-area plan. So last week we briefed you on the goals and policies. The draft before you today has the rest of the content of the sub-area plan, which includes the introductory text, which covers the current conditions and some of the planning context. There are now sub-area plan maps in the document and some infographics that summarize, again, some of the current conditions. But in terms of the goals and policies, that content is the same as what you were reviewing last week. First, we'll take a look at the maps. There are a couple of maps in the sub-area plan. I just pulled out these two to highlight. The first map on the left here is the station sub-area boundary. So the area that is not grayed out here would be the entire station sub-area. But then as important is the map on the right, which shows the two phases of the sub-area plan or the two proposed phases. Phase one, which will be adopted concurrently with the plan, is that area in orange, which is the existing town center and the adjacent multifamily zones. Those will all experience a zoning change through this process. And then the area in blue, the phase two area outside of that, That's all things that will be considered at a later date as guided by the goals and policies of the sub-area plan. So the important takeaway again, the map, is that the phase 1 area is happening now and the phase 2 area will happen in the future, but no decisions are locked in on that phase 2 area beyond the policy direction in the sub-area plan. There are also some infographics. The text here is a little small. I don't expect you to be able to read it here, but these are in the body of the plan. And the one on the left is figure 2 of the plan, and that kind of outlines the phasing and what will happen in phase 1 versus phase 2, as outlined in the goals and policies. But it's a nice summary and something a little more visually interesting than a cold table. Same with the infographic on the right. This is describing the existing conditions with some description of the population within the station sub-area and the median household income, those types of statistics. And those are, again, for that entire larger station sub-area. But there are several infographics throughout the draft that you'll see. We talked about this last week, but I wanted to bring it up again in case folks at home are watching and getting caught up here. The goals and policies of the sub-area plan, there are some existing goals and policies that have been relocated from other elements of the comp plan. The example here is those are notated in the draft that say previously LU land use 6.4. That means that this was a policy 6.4 in the land use element and has been relocated to the sub-area plan. Any of those existing policies are shown with a strikeout underlined format, so you can see what's changed from the existing policy to the proposed amendment. And in general, what you'll see is that a lot of these are town center policies that have been adapted to fit within this larger station area planning framework. There are some new goals and policies. Again, we talked about this last week, but just to bring folks along, the new goals and policies will not be noted in the draft. They do not have any notation. They're also not shown in strikeout and underline because these are new policies. And they really focus on our phase 2 planning work. So once we adopt the plan and start working towards that phase 2 process in 2027, these policies will kind of guide how we do that work. And those include things like that we need to conduct public outreach, policy direction to undertake an empirical parking study during phase 2, and then also some planning for surplus public property that is potential affordable housing sites. Those are identified in the draft as well. The sub-area plan also includes an implementation program. This is essentially boiling down all of those policies that talk about phase 2 into actions that the city needs to take. And it kind of details that work that we'll need to do following adoption of the comp plan through 2029. And those implementation actions are sorted into different action types. So and there's some icons in the table that explain what each of those action types are. That's at the end of the sub-area plan. A note on, before I move to that last slide on this, the sub-area plan will be adopted as part of the comprehensive plan it'll be adopted by reference. So this kind of lives nested within that comprehensive plan. But it'll be a separate document, essentially. There are a few things still to come for the sub-area plan. We expect that there may be some policies related to transportation, capital facilities, and utilities, but we're still working on some studies regarding that infrastructure. that will coincide with updating those elements of the comprehensive plan. So we may end up adding some policies there before we're through with the draft of the sub-area plan. But that would be, we'll take a look at that later this month when we get those. Yeah.
If I may, is that phase one or phase? Oh, sorry, if I may, are you saying the additions will be part of phase one or phase two? Phase one.
They'll mostly focus on phase one. There will be some infrastructure impacts that come from the zoning changes that we need to account for in the policies. We're still in the process of drafting those goals and policies in the elements, and so we're not sure which are going to be placed into the sub-area plan and which are going to go in the elements. But that'll be, I think, what is it, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, we'll be bringing those forward. So, but it'll cover your original question. It'll cover both phases likely.
Okay, thank you.
So that actually wraps up my run through of the sub-area plan. I do have the document. If you would like to take a look at it, we can walk through it after I get through the slides here. If you have any specific questions, but you can also provide those questions by email. We can answer it that way. Moving now to the comprehensive plan, there are 3 elements that were included in your packet. The land use, housing, and economic development elements. These are draft amendments of those existing elements. There's some notation in the draft as you're looking through it. You'll see these kind of peach colored boxes. There's an example on the slide here. And these are calling out some of the major changes and providing a little bit more context. Those boxes will not be in the final draft. Those are just there for reference only as you're reading through the draft. And then the proposed amendments to these goals and policies and these elements will be shown in strikeout and underline throughout. And that's because all of this is existing language in the comp plan. So you'll be able to see additions in strikeout additions underlined and things that would be removed struck out. The goals and policies of all 3 elements kind of generally are the amendments to those policies can be summarized as that most of the changes here are relocating policies to that station sub-area plan, or they're amendments to those policies to make them consistent with the station sub-area plan. So in general, what you're seeing in the goals and policies is not necessarily new policy direction. It's not adding things to. It's just a reorganization of these 3 elements because we now have that station sub-area plan. There's some changes to the content of the introduction that is new. And we'll take a look at that a little bit. But in terms of the goals and policies, most of that is just to be remain consistent now that we have the station sub-area plan. There are some major updates through the land use, housing, and economic development elements. I just covered the relocation of those goals and policies to the sub-area plan. Under land use goal 1, we have a proposed amendment to reflect the new station area as kind of this focal point of the higher density in the city. Then the land use element now indexes to or refers to the 2026 land capacity analysis, which is a report that will be included as an appendix to the plan. That land capacity analysis is a study looking at under existing conditions and proposed development regulations and market factors, how many units can be expected or can be accommodated under the current comprehensive plan. And so that kind of detailed report will be an appendix. And then in the land use element, you'll see land use element figure 4 has been updated to show the capacity that will be added by the proposed upzones. Again, these are the upzone to the town center zone and those adjacent multifamily zones that phase 1 area of the station sub-area plan. Here, this is land use element figure 4. we won't go through every column, but the key part here is that on the right-hand side, we have a capacity in housing units that shows roughly at each of these zone categories, based on density, roughly how many units at each of those density levels can be expected. Again, based on existing conditions, the development regulations, and market factors. So for example, the low density housing capacity, so that would be like our single family zoning housing capacity. We found a capacity of about 356 units. Moderate density, which would be that middle housing that we're now required to allow in the single family zones. That would be 337 units. Low-rise multifamily would be 535 units, and then mid-rise multifamily is where we expect to see the most, or where we'll have the most increase in development capacity because of those upzones in town center and the adjacent multifamily zones. That capacity in the mid-rise is 1,698 units, and then ADUs are 239 units. One of the changes that came in to this table based on that land capacity analysis is the inclusion of those moderate density units and the ADUs. That was something that we didn't quantify in the last plan, in the last update. But now that we have our regulations for those things updated to reflect the state law, we were able to factor those in. And that helps a bit when we look in a minute at our housing units by affordability level.
Adam, is this chart for all of Mercer Island, the TOD zone, or all of Mercer Island?
Yes, this is island-wide.
And on the ADUs, when you, the 239, is that anticipated? Because I remember before we went through this, the prior regulations, technically you could have an ADU on any of the 7,000 single family home lots. So is the 239 what is expected?
Yes. So one of the ways that we looked at this is our consultants, when they were preparing the land capacity analysis, they used a reasonable rate of development assumption. So they looked at the uptake of these housing types and extrapolated from there. It's worth pointing out too that this is a number covering a 20-year time period. It's not looking at, this isn't through 2027 or something like that. It's through the 2044 time planning horizon of the plan. Yeah.
And then along the same lines, is the moderate density including the 1110, 4,
Yes.
6? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, the 239 number, is that constrained by the current gross floor area requirements and that lot coverage? Because I'm recalling a gentleman came to the meeting and said that they were interested in an ADU but couldn't due to the 65% rule. Is there anything that's been modified, or is that currently constrained by our current rules about that?
Well, it's a little bit complicated the way that the math works on this, but we didn't necessarily have a specific factor for the lot coverage because we were just concerned about whether or not you could build an ADU there on the lot. But some of that gets caught up in that reasonable rate of redevelopment because there are those constraints that kind of constraint would prevent somebody from building that. So if we were looking at like the raw amount of capacity, like how many lots could you build an ADU on, the number would be much higher. But because we've tempered it by that reasonable rate of development, that captures some of that. Any other questions on this table before I move on?
Yeah, just one other question. And you know what? I'll hold on to the question.
Just that there are a number of appendix documents referenced. Are those going to follow? Like this says Appendix G.
Yeah, so all of the technical reports that underlie this work will be included in the comprehensive plan update. So they'll all be available. Yeah.
Are those like timing on that? Is that the 2 to 3 weeks from now you're saying?
For the land capacity analysis and the barriers analysis and the displacement risk evaluation, those are technical documents that we don't need a planning commission recommendation on. So we're not planning to present those as part of our as part of this process, but we can make those available at some point. Yeah. All right, I'll keep rolling. Some of the other major updates, we included housing element figure 8, which it updates our housing capacity but disaggregates it by affordability level. This is one of the things that we need to do to comply with the hearings board order. They specifically directed the city to disaggregate housing capacity in this way, and we'll take a look at that figure here in a moment. There's also this references to the 2026 barriers analysis in the housing element, and that will be that's another one of those technical reports that will be included as an appendix. But we're goes to the question Commissioner Neese just asked. That's not going to be coming to the Planning Commission for a recommendation. And then the updated summary of potential barriers and actions needed. Again, that comes from the barriers analysis, but it's outlining during phase 1 of this project or to comply during the adoption of the comp plan, what are the actions that we're taking in the housing element specifically to reduce barriers to affordable housing. So that's another thing that's required as part of this adequate provisions work we've been doing for the hearings board order. This is housing element figure 8. I appreciate that it's not terribly large on the screen. So we won't go into too much detail here, but this table is disaggregating our housing capacity, that housing capacity we were looking at the last table. This is now disaggregated by affordability level. So essentially our consultants, as they were preparing the land capacity analysis, they looked at the distribution of units in other comparable developments at affordability levels, at those different affordability levels, and then extrapolated from that this capacity for each of the housing types. There's a lot of information here. I would say take a look at what's in the housing element. The key takeaway here is that it's highlighting that there is a capacity shortfall at that 0 to 30% of the area median income. Our housing need there, we have a deficit. And that really is kind of laying the foundation of why we're doing all of these other updates in the comprehensive plan, is to address that shortfall that's shown here, which is about 500, well, it's 510 units. There's also, as I mentioned, a table that lists the barriers that we identified and the actions that we're taking to close those barriers or address those barriers. And essentially, the barriers analysis technical document looks at the development regulations and permit processes and other things that apply to different housing types, and then identifies whether or not that may create a barrier, and then highlights these actions to be taken to close or to address those barriers. Essentially, the main thing we're doing to address barriers is implementing phase 1 of the station subarea plan. Those zoning increases are the principal way that we're addressing the challenges around affordable housing. There are also a couple of other policies outlined in here, adopting an optional determination of non-significance policy, which is something that we already do administratively, but we want to add a policy to the housing element. And then also adopting the permanent regulations for shelters, temporary, emergency, and permanent supportive housing, which will be part of this process. When we look at the development regulations in the next briefing, we can kind of go through how that will all work. But these are actions that we need to take to close those barriers to address the hearings board order. There's still some work to come on these elements. We'll get this completed prior to the public hearing, which is scheduled for June 3rd. We need to update the land use map to align with the proposed rezones. So basically, we need to change the town center boundary on the future land use map of the land use element, which I just got the updated map today, so it'll be in the next draft that gets presented. And then we mentioned earlier those consistency amendments for the transportation, utilities, and capital facilities elements when we get those in a couple of weeks.
Adam, can you just give me an idea of when you talk about consistency amendments, are we talking about having our transportation, utilities, and capital facilities enlarged or somehow changed to meet this increased density? And just give me, like a 30,000-foot idea of what they're talking about.
So we're required when we make changes to the comprehensive plan, particularly when we're adding development capacity, the city's required to look at the impacts that has on the levels of service for its capital facilities, utilities, and transportation infrastructure. So essentially what that does is it looks at like we're expecting this number of housing units, this number of households over that 20-year time period. What does that do in terms of our road capacity, our sewer capacity, and our water capacity? So we're actually currently evaluating those levels of service for those things in light of the new housing units that we're adding, or the potential new housing units that we're adding with our zoning, our upzone. And so essentially it looks at, we're planning for this many housing units to over the 20-year time period, and there's going to be this many new drivers, this many new water connections, this many new sewer connections.
So I was one of the attorneys who appealed to the Growth Management Hearing Board to force the prior council to adopt our transportation concurrency ordinance. And under that ordinance, it would be the development itself that would fund these upgrades to the extent that the development would then exceed the levels of service. Is that how it's going to work here, where the development itself would fund the upgrades?
Yeah, so one of the things that, the concurrency requirement doesn't change, so that stays the same. And then one of the other mechanisms the city has is the transportation impact fees. This is a fee that's paid by the developer to fund those transportation improvements that would be required by that development.
So yeah, and improvements that are needed to serve new capacity. So as you're adding additional units to the city, that's paid for through the impact fees. And we're looking now at, what additional transportation projects might be needed to serve this development. Those will be added to the transportation improvement program. And then when we update impact fees in the future, it will take those projects into account to size the fee that's paid by each development to make sure that those improvements can be done by the city.
We'll talk all about LOS soon enough.
Yeah, we'll get more into this.
Let's see, I've got 2 more slides here. So the Planning Commission comments on these drafts, we're asking that you provide those by end of day on Monday, May 11th. And you can email those directly to me, and I will work on getting those into the comment matrix with the help of Madeline, our assistant planner. And we'll compile those into a matrix that we'll then provide to the Planning Commission for your consideration. And then we will have staff responses to questions, or if there's clarification needed prior to the public hearing on June 3rd. Looking ahead at our next steps, at least there are fewer bullet points now than there were a couple of weeks ago. Next week, we'll brief the Planning Commission on the proposed development code amendments that would implement all of these changes to the comprehensive plan. And on May 20th, we'll continue the development code amendments. We suspect that there will be some Planning Commission discussion about those amendments, because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. And then on May 27th, we're planning to come back with the capital facilities, utilities, and transportation elements. And again, those consistency amendments that may be needed for the sub-area plan and those other elements of the comp plan. And that would lead us to the June 3rd public hearing. And we're working towards getting your recommendation wrapped up by June 10th.
Just when you talk about the development code amendments, we're talking about phase one.
Correct. Yeah. And the development code amendments, more or less, they fit into, there's the zoning changes to address the town center and adjacent multifamily upzone. There are some consistency amendments with the design standards. We also have the shelters, temporary emergency and permanent supportive housing changes there. What did I miss?
Inclusionary zoning and fee in lieu. So all those affordability requirements, we'll be making some updates to that.
Mm-hmm. And we'll walk through kind of each of those buckets in the briefings. Yeah.
I noticed there's some mentions in this document about walkability. I'm also wondering about like cycling. Where is it appropriate to address those comments? Is it in this? Is it anywhere we see walking or transportation, or is that in the bicycle plan update?
The transportation element primarily covers those kind of issues. There's a number of multimodal and bike and ped type goals and policies. Some of that has been carried into the sub-area plan as well for, specific connectivity issues within that area. So I think those are the two primary places. The bike and ped plan, there's an existing one that's quite old now. It will be updated in the next couple of years. That will have the very specific planning for the actual projects that will be implemented over the next couple of decades.
It's okay to make general comments here.
Yeah, the policies that guide, the type of planning and the type of investments the city should be making will be here.
That concludes my slide deck.
Thank you. If I just may ask a quick question, there were, I don't want to get into any specifics at this particular point, but just generally, there's a couple of references in terms of phase one and phase two, and there's some specific requirements that are saying that they'll be addressed in phase two. Is there any way that there's varying scales, in my professional opinion, in terms of the potential impact between when phase one goes into play and when phase two would go into play. It sounds like it'll be at least a year until there's consideration, and then probably a couple of years until there's actual codification associated with that. Is it appropriate for this commission to have discussions around possible ways to fast track phase two items, specific phase two items into phase one? Is there any opportunity?
So I think the timing of that may prove challenging. So one of the things that we need to keep in mind with phase one is that it needs to be implemented at the time the comp plan is adopted, which will be in July. And so any of those things that, in maybe a normal planning process, we could spend another couple of 3 months working on it. We're going to have a hard time making that deadline. But I do think that there's opportunity if there are concerns, say, about the design standards, we could add some policy direction about phase two, because that's going to be an ongoing process that might help blunt some of those concerns. If you were wanting to say, one of the things we've heard is that there's maybe some concern about the design standards and how they interface with adjacent zones. We could have a policy that directs that kind of work in phase two, so that we're really taking a close look at that in that planning process. But
so it would be both categorical, but can it also be a priority? Can we establish the priority or recommend a priority in terms of the way that phase two would be implemented?
I think you could. There's a couple of ways you could do that. You could add a policy that has that, or you could include it as part of your planning commission findings. So with your recommendation, there's a list of things that you can also communicate to the council. So if you were like, we really think that, I don't know, policy 7.4 really needs to be the prioritized, you could make a finding to that effect. That wouldn't obligate us to implement it on July 31st, but it would at least give the council an idea of where the planning commission's at on that one topic.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I just do want to point out, though, that that was a pretty extensive discussion at the council on that. And I know the council said with the deadlines that we have to focus on phase one, save phase two for 2029, because we have to find out whether we've reached compliance, before we move on. So we have so much on our plate, and I know the council does too. So I'm not so sure that we'll be getting, we could put that in there, but I don't know that the council might sit there and say, I thought we gave direction on this.
Yeah.
If I may, Chair, what I'd like to do is to see if there's an opportunity for us to discuss it here and then see if there's, briefly discuss in a couple of very high topics and see if there's an opportunity to build a coalition of understanding quickly, not in any way prohibiting phase one, but asking for prioritization associated with items in phase two. Does that?
Well, phase two, the council's position was that phase two is going to be a lot more politically challenging because you're moving out of a town center and multifamily zone into a single family zone. So I think what they wanted to do is I think they want to see how phase one works. Does it meet compliance? Then how does it work? Then that tells the council and the city what might have to be done in, as they call it, a sub-district. These are sub-districts. And so I think that what they really like to do is do this. That's what they, in the council meetings I watch.
Kim just jumped on. I think she has something she wants to add here.
I did. That July 31st, 2026 deadline comes from the Growth Management Planning Board, and council's direction to staff, to you, is reach compliance with that order by that July date. That what they see, and I'm sure you do too, Committee Member Perez, is there are so many things that have to be done before them that they really are asking for that focus on just that for now because we have such a tight deadline. I understand what you're saying is you think you could do some prioritization in a small amount of time, and maybe that's possible, but I just did want to reiterate why that deadline, and we have so much to do before then, that we all have fingers crossed.
Thank you. Understood.
And if it helps too, there will be a scoping process for that phase two work. There will be some of that agenda setting for that work in 2027 as we start that phase of work. So we don't have to do everything today other than we have to comply with the order. And
Any further questions, commissioners? Anyone? Anything further you want to present on this?
No, thanks.
Okay, well, is there any other business? Is there any other business that you'd like to bring up?
No, we don't have any other business to bring up. Adam already went over the upcoming meetings, and I know you're all aware we'll be meeting again next week.
Right. Okay. Well, the next meeting is a special meeting scheduled for Wednesday, May 13th at 6 p.m. There being no other business to come before the Planning Commission, the time is now 6:40, and the meeting is concluded. As a reminder to the commissioners, please stay seated until city staff has terminated the broadcast.